pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the learning strategists at CLSS.
Hi everyone, my name is Yaseen. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm really happy to be here as one of the learning strategists on the central team at CLSS, which we'll get into shortly.
Absolutely. So you might be wondering, what are learning strategists? What do we do? And how can you engage with our services? So learning strategists are UofT staff members who meet with students through workshops and one-on-ones, and we essentially support students' learning needs. So some topics may include time and energy management, reducing procrastination and distractions, perhaps effective and evidence-based study strategies, and creating realistic plans for exams and assignments. So as Yaseen mentioned, we do have on-location learning strategists like myself, and we have central learning strategists. So just to kind of share the differences, I'll cover the on-location learning strategists. So located at your college or faculty, for example, at New College, Victoria College, computer science, we do have staff, for example, learning strategists who do work with U of T students, and it is very local and embedded. And we do cover the topics as we described earlier. We also do have learning strategists that work with graduate students as well, and professional programs like medicine. So I will pass it off to Yaseen to share a little bit more about central learning strategists and their programming.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Central learning strategists also discuss the same topics that Elizabeth had mentioned. There are multiple ways to connect with one of us. On Folio, which is our registration and booking system, you can see workshops like university prep and learning how to learn. So just so you know, university prep is a micro course that we run before the semester starts off with a big kick. And these are 3 workshops that are linked together about how to study effectively, how to organize your time and commitments, and how to stay motivated. So we're running this micro course twice, from August 12th to 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time in Toronto, and then August 19th to 21st at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So we're really being mindful of those who are coming in from different time zones, so we can have a way to kind of talk about some of the experiences that U of T students face even before you get into your classes and rhythms. But outside of university prep, which is again hosted at the start of the semester, we also have the Learning How to Learn workshops. So these are evergreen topics: assignment planning, managing energy and focus, the role of AI in your learning. So we run those year round. So check out the workshops. And learning how to learn is sort of thinking about how we learn metacognitively. What do we know about ourselves as learners that impacts how we study, how we regulate? So many topics that I think will be relevant to all students. But again, we also have the one-on-one appointments, which will be shared in this live. So one-on-one appointments are spaces where we can go deeper, we can get into, just how learning is really entangled with things like emotions and our past experiences. And sometimes we hit a wall and we just need to verbalize and have a different perspective. So that's something that we can support you with. But one great crash course around learning is in our You Learning podcast series. And I'll just flip to Elizabeth here because she's been spearheading our podcast resources. So tell us a little bit more about that episode, please.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yaseen. So that link is shared. If you also go on to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even iHeartRadio and search up You Learning podcast, you'll be able to see this UofT designed podcast where learning strategists like myself and Yaseen is also on the second episode. But we're recommending the first episode just to take a little bit of that information in of what is our department, what do learning strategists do, and if you have any inquiries, I think a lot of that gets answered if you do listen to the podcast. So we do recommend going there. So now I guess segueing into our next common question on how do I balance university learning with other life responsibilities? So this is really talking about time management, which is a very common reason and theme for students to come and chat with a learning strategist. Because you are an adult learner, I'm sure that a lot of students, they are thinking about their course load, they're thinking about how many courses to engage with. Maybe you want to join extracurriculars, maybe you are working part-time. So there just might be a lot more to handle. So because time looks differently in the university landscape, we really want you to think about the differences. So, for example, there's a little bit less structure in your time, meaning that you have specific time to go into your lecture, but there might be a lot of free time. There's less accountability. So, for example, you're going to go into lecture and no one's really taking attendance, right? So, how do you stay accountable to that work? And of course, because these are university designed courses, meaning that it's really higher level thinking, a lot of higher level application, there is a lot of independent work that you have to commit to. So, for example, maybe additional research on the side, perhaps some readings as well. So, some of the strategies we're recommending students to think about in the month of August or whenever you are engaging with this video is to plan your semester. So, having a week by week view of what is coming up. Perhaps you have assignments coming up, perhaps you have assessments like midterms or tests and exams. So, thinking about what your schedule is, what your plan is, and how you're going to manage that as the days progress. We also have this phenomenal 4-month calendar where you could get a bird's eye view of your semester, because in the university you will be required to engage with your syllabus, which you'll get in the first week of classes, and that has all of the deadlines. So thinking about strategy to map out your semester. Another thing that we recommend students to consider is separating the planning from the doing, which means that you might plan, I'm going to read this reading or this article for 2 hours on Friday, but that's just you planning it. Then you actually have to go sit down and do the work. So we really want you to think about how do you separate the planning and the doing, and how can you also prepare yourself to keep accountable to that time. And then remember that time management is kind of a myth. So we really want you to think about how do you manage your attention and your energy. So for example, it comes for example, the reading example. You might think about, do I work best in a library instead of at home, and vice versa. So these are really great things to think about. In terms of our resources, we have the dry erase calendar, which is the 4-month calendar at the UofT bookstore. We do have the PDFs for time management and organization, and also setting your day for success. With that, I'll pass it off to Yaseen.
Thanks, Elizabeth. As you were talking, I was really reflecting on my own experience as a graduate student here at UofT. I'm doing my PhD, and so many wisdoms there around, planning is just one part of the puzzle. And I think we all can make a really long to-do list or, create a beautiful color blocked schedule, but the application of that, how do we regulate, how do we break things down? That's something that we as learning strategists are really excited about talking to students about. And we will be getting into a little bit more in this YouTube Live. So because Elizabeth was talking about time, one of the frequently asked questions we get, especially in this landscape where we have access to information, we're using many more devices for our learning. A lot of students ask, well, my professor has posted the lecture slides on the learning management system. I have the recordings, I have all the resources. Do I really need to go to lecture? And, this is, a layered question. But one thing that Elizabeth and I have found over the last few years is that there's a lot of benefit to working from home. There's convenience, but sometimes it's really hard to structure your day because there are interruptions. There isn't that clear-cut boundary between starting one task and another. So we really recommend having a space where you go and you associate a certain location with a particular subject. There's a subject expert talking about that area of expertise, and you're less likely to have those issues with focus and concentration, right? Another thing I often tell students is live lectures is where the course instructors often drop a tip or two, a hint like, don't focus so much on X, Y, Z in the textbook, maybe, allocate more of your energy here. And that's something that you might not get looking at the recording or just downloading the PDF of the slides, That said, you are the best judge of what works for your schedule and your priorities. As Elizabeth said, we work with many students who have part-time jobs, who have long commutes, but really think about what benefits you get from attending a class in person. Maybe there is a participation component where you are assessed on how much you are prepared and you verbalize in a lecture or maybe in a tutorial or a lab. So that's something to consider, right? We highly recommend attending those unless you are sick or you have an emergency that gets in the way. That said, regardless of how you participate in your classes, we wanted to share a model with you called the study cycle. So I will share this visual shortly. Give me 1 second to bring it up on screen. All right. So in presentation mode. And this is, of course, a cycle that you can adapt. Not every course is the same. Not every discipline works within this cycle, but we do recommend having this repetition because the more you repeat something, the more it becomes habituated. You don't have to think about it so long. So one thing that we always recommend before you go to a lecture is look through your readings. You don't have to do a deep focus reading necessarily, unless your professor has asked you to do it, but maybe think about terms that come up often. Maybe there's some abbreviations you can make. So you're really trying to activate background knowledge so that when you get to the lecture or the learning experience, you're not going in cold, meaning you're thinking, what's going on? You've done a little bit about that preparation in advance. Then, of course, we highly recommend taking notes in some way. So, the question of do I take notes by hand? Do I take notes, using a laptop or a device? That is a more layered question, and we have workshops on note taking. But the idea is you're not just dictating what happens in a lecture, input, output. You're really assessing what is your background knowledge? Does it align? Are you understanding concepts? Where might you need to go back and do a little bit more attentive study? So you're really trying to identify not only what the content is, but what are your content gaps? Um, a very good practice is, I know it feels redundant because you've just gone to lecture, but to review your notes immediately after that experience. So within 24 hours is the kind of rule of thumb, but within the same week is also a really good practice. Now, we really stress this because as a student, I'm sure we all know that weeks pass by very quickly. So we always have that intention. I'll get to my lecture notes, I'll review the material, but the week resets and you have a whole boatload of other courses to prioritize. So staying on top of this really helps you when you get to those peak seasons of midterms and finals because you're not having to relearn material. So it's a little bit of investment of time upfront, but it really pays off in the future. Now, as Elizabeth was saying, it's not about perfection. If you skip a couple of weeks, it's not a big deal, but we really want to make this as habituated as possible, as I was saying. The next stage of the study cycle is to actively study. So, there's nothing wrong with passive learning. I like opening up a textbook and reading it beginning to end, but there is really this important piece around how you will be assessed in your university experience. So getting your hands on practice tests, doing the practice problems, asking yourself about conceptual knowledge, making your own mind maps. These are all study practices that we get into in our workshops, but the idea is to bring some active engagement with what you are learning. And finally, check that learning. So where are those content gaps? Maybe you need to go talk to a professor, maybe look at supplemental videos on YouTube. But the whole idea is you want to fill that gap so you feel like you're building that foundation on a very solid, schema, if you will. So really knowing, okay, these are the places where I'm feeling confident, but these are the areas that I'm shaky. I'll stop there, but Elizabeth, anything you wanted to add when you get that question from students around, should I go to lecture? What's the value if I already have the recordings, etc.?
Absolutely. I think it's very common, especially after the pandemic. And I think as you're sharing, Yaseen, it is a process. It's quite a cycle. And I think that's one of the reasons why we decided to show that visual. That's a visual that I definitely refer to with students. And we really hope you could think about your learning as a process versus, I'm just going to show up and that's it. I think it becomes a lot more deeper, especially when you're in the university. So kind of segueing off, because I think we can add on to, how do you find community in learning, right? Because you're just engaging in lecture, but how do you make friends? Like, what does that even look like? So if you're someone who is coming to U of T, these are some of the resources we really want you to think about. For example, with our department, we have study hubs. So these are offered for university students who can come together and you could decide what you want to work on. And essentially, I believe it's like a 2 hour period where you have accountability. You're working with a bunch of students, and you could hopefully find that in person and also online community for yourself. We also really encourage you to engage with our exceptional peer mentor team. So they have appointments also available on Folio. And if you're just looking for accountability, perhaps you're just wanting to talk to an upper year student on how to study for midterms, how to plan assignments. So they might be a really great first step resource. For the incoming class, you might be engaging with your orientation with your faculty or your college. So we really recommend making friends through that experience. As you know, you're going through orientation week, if you could even decide if you can ask, based off of the courses you've taken, who's taking bio, are you in this course? That could be a really great start to making friends. And of course, we do have the recognized study groups. So if you feel that these class sizes are quite large, I really want a smaller study group to connect with on a weekly basis. This really allows you to be accountable to your learning and hopefully also make friends. And then the last space I really hope students explore are our vast and amazing libraries at this university. So if you just want a space for your learning, to be in community, to just, engage with the awesome librarians as well, we really encourage you to do that. So some of the resources highlighted are the study hubs, peer mentor appointments, UofT libraries, and also the registered study groups. The registration for the recognized study groups open on August 25th. So yeah, learning takes time. Learning happens the best in community. And also I think that when you are learning with a group of people, there's accountability, and that's really what keeps us motivated. So I'm going to pass it off to Yaseen to talk a little bit about motivation.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. And, if I can bring up my PhD journey as well, a lot of the time I like working in solitude. I'm an independent learner, but I've realized that I really need community. It doesn't mean I'm part of a study group every day or I'm going to a library, every block of time, but it's the idea that when you tell someone else about your plan, or you say, in 2 hours, I'm going to text you my progress, there is that sort of sense of there's someone other than me that's helping me progress in my studies and in my learning. So I always tell students you can hack this however you want. It can be super low barrier by texting a friend saying, I've been procrastinating all day and I just need you to check up on me in the next few hours and make sure that I'm getting work done. So, motivation, procrastination, this is a very common topic. In fact, it might be the most common topic that I'm asked about. And one thing that I want to flag early on is that a lot of students feel really hard, they're quite hard on themselves if they're avoiding work and they feel like it's some issue with time management or they're lazy or they lack the willpower. But what we find is often when we are delaying starting a task, it's often about overwhelm. We don't know how to begin. It feels too difficult to start. So if we can tap into what is the barrier, like what is actually preventing us from starting, we're more likely to troubleshoot and find ways of working around that, right? And as Elizabeth had mentioned, when you're working in community, you're sharing tips and strategies and resources. And when you have friends who are taking the same course, maybe you start a WhatsApp thread or you have an email chain saying, oh, was anyone stuck on problem number 3? So it feels a little bit more concrete. I think a lot of us are used to using stress as a way to motivate ourselves. For example, if something is due in 2 days, it feels a lot more real, right? Versus 2 weeks away. So the more we can make our learning a lot more concrete in that way, to think about, I'm talking to someone tomorrow about this. I booked an appointment with my TA, my teaching assistant, my instructor is holding office hours. It creates this sort of pressure to kind of find the answer and address our learning. So, nothing against using stress to motivate ourselves, cramming last minute work, that will happen from time to time. I just want to normalize that, university life is tricky. It's hard to manage everything. And sometimes we will default to some of those practices, but we want to think about systems of consistency, right? We want to think about taking breaks. We're not robots. We can't work 24/7. So just a few micro tips before we end off here. One thing that Elizabeth and I talk to students a lot about is working in much shorter amounts of time. So rather than 3 hours in one sitting, which feels like you're getting a lot done, think about yourself in October and November. That's maybe not the most sustainable, realistic goal. But if we think about 20 minutes at a time and stacking on top of that, that builds to really long sort of wins in the long run. If you do find yourself beating yourself up saying, you're so lazy, you haven't started XYZ, we invite students to think about non-judgmental awareness. So what are the thoughts that are coming up? What might be preventing you from starting or continuing at that task? What kind of support do you need? Like Elizabeth had mentioned the study hubs, which are great spaces where folks motivate each other, right? And we're all kind of, postponing a particular task or subject. How do we get into it in that shared community? And one thing that I often remind students about is because we're using devices so much more frequently, it's really important to take non-screen breaks, right? Because we're thinking about that endurance. And if you're using a lot of your stamina, looking at 3 or 4 screens and multiple platforms and applications, of course we're going to burn out really early in the day. So don't wait until you're depleted and feeling exhausted. Really think about the breaks and rewards that sustain you, maybe things that are off of a screen, taking walks, seeing friends, meditating, journaling. These are all little small things that add up to really big impacts. So with that, I think we have gotten to the end of our frequently asked questions, but you might have many more. And this is, again, we'll invite you to connect with the Center for Learning Strategy Support. So for incoming and returning students, we just want to remind you to sign up for University Prep. That is the micro course. Actually, the third workshop talks about motivation in a lot more detail. So those are running again August 12th to 14th, and then again August 19th to 21st. So you have some options depending on what works for your schedule. We also want to plug the Learning How to Learn workshops. These are run year-round, many sessions on assignment planning, preparing for multiple choice question tests, how to create a schedule that is sustainable. So again, this is not your last opportunity to learn about all these principles and strategies. We are here to support you, and we hope that you have a great, seamless transition to studying at UofT, and we look forward to connecting with you. Elizabeth, any last words from you?
No, thank you so much, Yaseen. This has just been so incredible. We really hope you learned a thing or two. And if anything sounds or looks challenging or difficult, we are truly here for you as a resource. So definitely stay engaged, be in touch, and we wish you all the best this year.